remember that this is interactive. I'll say that a few times. Someone has asked a question that I understand has caused some people concerns. I understand that it's changed our views of things, and perhaps people still, or certainly there's some people still uncomfortable with this concept. So we'll go through it together. It says, please explain more about the issue that the King of the South does not have a master to answer to. Know that in this world we have only two persons, groups of people, gods and Satan. Now if we have in Daniel 2:8 the King of the North, where we can have God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom, to whom does the King of the South belong? So, particularly with the person that's asking this question, it's going to be much more helpful if you actually interact in the answering of it, because it's usually in the dialogue that it becomes more easier to solidify an answer. So it's in the middle of this question. It says that in this world we have only two powers or groups of people. Someone want to explain that? How do we have two groups of people? I'm assuming they're taking this from the quote from Matthew 6:24. I might go to Luke 16, which is a parallel verse, which words it slightly differently. Luke 16, verse 13. Luke 16, verse 13. It's a familiar verse. Luke 16:13 says, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So if we went back to our original construct, we talked about a proxy war. A war that began in heaven spilled out to this earth. And by the time you get to just after the fall, and most clearly seen with Cain and Abel, we understand it's a proxy war. So first of all, war started in heaven. It spills out to this earth. And then we have these two opposing parties. There is God and Satan, who are at odds. But they're never going to fight. God and Satan are never going to fight. They're going to fight through proxies. So God will fight through his kingdom, his church, and Satan will fight through his kingdom, or his church. And then when you have a party go head to head, it's these two that come into conflict, the church and the church. So if we were thinking about the days of persecution, you have God's people being persecuted by Satan's people. You have the papacy killing the Waldenses. You don't have God and Satan fighting hand to hand in that history. But when you come down to for one example, you have, if you want to see like the Protestant Reformation. Within the Protestant Reformation, you'll have the Pope, his representatives, clashing head-on with Martin Luther. The people are deciding whether they want to belong to God's kingdom or Satan's kingdom. But God and Satan aren't there physically fighting. God is equipping Luther to fight, and Satan is equipping the papacy to fight. So this is the style of the proxy war. And then God arms us, He gives us our weapons, our protection, our shield. And this is the exact same model that we've been discussing. This model of the king of the north and the king of the south. They're fighting an information war between the two of them. God and Satan fighting an information war. But when it comes down to us, we become the proxy wars of this dynamic. So, just as you would have it in something like Venezuela. And in Venezuela, you would have Guaido. You would have the United States, and you would have Russia. But they don't fight. The United States is going to equip the opposition, and Russia is going to equip the government. And then these two will clash. And this is why the United States and Russia, but we already know that Russia doesn't pretend to be nice, but this is why the United States becomes so hypocritical when it comes to its attacks on South America or immigration, all of these different issues, that they've been able to foment this because they keep engaging in proxy wars that cause damage to weaker countries. So it's the exact same model that we see in World War III, or this final war between the King of the North and the King of the South, that we see the whole of the Great Controversy. Particularly now as we see information war and information war. So at the end of the world, we're following the exact same models internally and externally. So we discussed this model, and then we went to the history of Daniel 2, that parable story. And when we go to Daniel 2, we find that there's two structures. And those two structures that we're able to compare and contrast is the mountain, which becomes the stone, and the statue. So you have the statue and the mountain, and the statue is what kingdom? Satan's kingdom, the king of the north. Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, and Rome. And God's kingdom? It's the king of the north. And now the question comes, what about the king of the south? Because this is the story of Babylon as the king of the north, Medo Persia as the king of the north, Greece takes up that title, and finally Rome. And this takes us through papal Rome all the way to the end of the world, as we see in Daniel 11. So within this structure, there is no king of the south, yes? We're content with that. And this structure is Satan's kingdom, yes? This is his proxy. So then when it comes to the king of the south, how do you explain it if you can only serve two masters? We come back to what the king of the south is. What's the identifying characteristic of the king of the north? Revelation 17, verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. What is this representing? Good disciples of Parminder, what is this representing? Give me his answer. Sorry? What is this representing, this picture, in verse 3? History of the 1260? Someone else? Sorry? Church and state? What's the relation of the church to the state? Church controls the state. Why does this beast have 7 heads? My sister? So it's the kingdom in different dispensations. That was the answer I was looking for. Because this, when we go to this verse, we just want to see the papacy, but it has 7 heads, which is sitting on each one of those heads. So this is not just the papacy, this is Satan's kingdom from Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome, modern Rome. It's all 7. Can we see that? So this is representing the church and state, or Satan's church, through the history not just of the papacy, but from the beginning of him having a church all the way to the end. We can take a snapshot of that and see that at one point in time his church looks like the papacy. But if we went back into another history, we would see that this is the structure of Medo Persia, and Medo Persia was church over state. Babylon was Babylon, church over state. No? Hey. So, and we talk about Babylon and Medo Persia. I want to deal with these, Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece and Rome, and see whether or not they have the appearance of church over state. And if we went to Daniel 6, we'd go to the history of Darius. And Darius is going to make a decree, yes? He's going to make a decree. So Darius himself, what does he represent to the people? And God. He what would you call that? He's a church and state in one person. Because he is, what's that term that we use? He's deified himself. He is God to the people, God on earth. So this is why when he signs this decree, is he acting as God or a king? When he signs this decree, what does it have to do with it? We'll go through we'll scan through verse 1 to 6. They're trying to find a cause against Daniel. Verse 7. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. So normally people would pray to God, and for 30 days who can they only pray to? Darius, because he is to them God. He's supposed to be their God. So for 30 days, to supposedly honour him, they're not allowed to pray to any other God. They can only pray to Darius, yes? So is he acting here in his capacity as God or king? Acting as a God. So he's going to sign this decree as a God. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, he kneeled and prayed. So the men assembled, and he was thrown into the lion's den. Verse 12. Then they came near. They speak to the king. They said, you signed this decree as man or God? As God. And then what does the king try and do? Get out of the decree. As God or king? King. Can he do it? No. Why? Because as God is infallible. He would be telling the people, essentially, that he's not deified, he's not a God, that he made a mistake with that decree. And the weak human king in him can't do that. So Darius, even though what we see when it comes down to the history of particularly papal Rome is you see this split occur where you have the king separated from the church, and you have the papacy ruling over the kings of Europe. But for the history of much of this, they'd actually blended the two. Like you would think when you would think of the Caesars, they deified themselves and they became essentially God on earth. No king, if you think about the kings of the Dark Ages, they didn't deify themselves, they didn't practice that, they came under the Pope. But they blended it in some of this history. But Darius demonstrates to us that even when they've blended church and state into the one individual, it's still the church that rules the state, even in one person. He as God rules, he as king. And he as king wants to erase that decree, and he can't do it. Does that make sense? So we have church and state, and church over the state through each one of these kingdoms, all the way through to the end. When you come to Egypt, it actually had an interesting system. When it becomes the king of the south in the history of Ptolemy, he operated differently. And I listened to a really good university lecturer. Most of it went over my head, but he had this small section, and it was showing how the way Ptolemy ruled Egypt was the same way Stalin ruled the Soviet Union. So if you wanted to go out and plant a crop of corn, you had to ask permission of the government, of Ptolemy's government. And then he would send inspectors out, even if it was just a little plot of corn, and they would tell you what you were allowed to plant, when you were allowed to plant it, where you were allowed to plant it. They would give you your seed if they permitted you to plant it. They would give you your equipment. You couldn't even have your own hoe. You had to get everything from the government because no one could grow a single crop without at every step the government's control. Ptolemy's government would even come and visit their farms. They had a round of inspectors, and they would tell you when you were allowed to harvest. To the day. They would say, you will harvest tomorrow. And then he would take everything, the state took everything, and then the state sold the grain. It was essentially a Stalinistic system of running the country. And he also did similarly to the Soviet Union with religion. Ptolemy used religion the same way Stalin did. Stalin ended up allowing religion, but he controlled everything. He used it as a means to control the people, and Ptolemy did the same thing. He created a system of religion, and then he told the priests of that religion, you are allowed to operate as long as you support me in power. Just the way Vladimir Putin today is using the Russian Orthodox Church. In fact, we all know of the Rosetta Stone. That Rosetta Stone is an inscriptions going from one of the Ptolemaic kings to the priests about this contract that they were going to have, how they needed to change this contract because of the political situation. So the way Ptolemy ruled Egypt was different to the way you see this church and state operate through the history of the King of the North. It's consistent through Ptolemy, through the history of France, through the history of the Soviet Union. And even though we can see it in history, we talked about the model of geography where you have north, south, east, and west. There's no absolute point of east or west. But there is of north and south. The North Pole and the South Pole. And they are what you would call polar opposites. So they look almost identical. Who are the two leading white supremacists in the world? Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. They are in so many ways identical. But they're also polar opposites because who brought Trump into power? The church brought Trump into power. Did the church bring Putin into power? No. Does he permit the church? downloaded, but there is really good, even going onto YouTube, go to YouTube and search. I will see if I can find it now. There is a good video that describes how Vladimir Putin uses the Orthodox Church for his own political ends. Channel 4 News, how Putin uses the Orthodox Church to boost his power. Russia's Orthodox Christians enjoying revival under Putin. Vice News, how Putin is using the Orthodox Church to build his power base. That is a good one. Look up Vice News, how Putin is using the Orthodox Church to build his power. So, Putin uses the church, but it's in this type of model, just like Ptolemy used this religion he set up. It's state over church. Donald Trump is different. He's church over state. If he steps out of line, his government crumbles because he must have the church propping him up for him to be allowed to function. So if the king of the north is the church over state relationship, if that's how it operates, we ask the question, how does Satan control? How does Satan control the people? Think of the 1260 years. He's going to control them through the papacy, using the kings. And I just want to mention, this is what we need for a compare and contrast, but this isn't complete. You have a church over a state, over a church. Papacy over the kings, over Protestantism or the world's entities. You can build a model where it's church over state over church, which becomes significant as a parable lesson. But this is the story of the 1260 of the papacy controlling the kings. So if it was this way, kings controlling the papacy, what year does that take us to? That takes us to 1773. And whose fault was that? In 1773, the kings control the papacy, yes? And they cause it to abolish the Jesuit order. So the Jesuits are abolished in 1773, the kings have controlled the papacy. And we haven't taught here, but you may be familiar. This we would call a dereliction of their duty. They're failing to fulfill the job function given to them by their boss. Satan has controlled the church and he's told the church to use the kings to kill God's people. The Pope, he feels comfortable. He's a little bit worried about his economic situation. France has told him, if you don't abolish the Jesuits, we won't give you back territory that we owe you. He's concerned about his temporal prosperity, so he chooses to let the kings control him so he can sit in comfort. I want to give another history. The papacy is scattered here. Take us to another history. 1863. Who's scattered here? So this is God's church scattered. They're scattered in 1863. Prior to that, in 1850, what do they go into? They go into a Laodicean condition. And what is a Laodicean condition? Darkness? Sorry? Blind? Compromise. So they go into a Laodicean condition. They compromise. They start getting comfortable. They start worrying about their temporal prosperity. They'd rather build their homes, make sure that they're all comfortable and they have their farms and they've sowed their crops and they don't feel the need to continue the work that their boss has given to them to do. So in 1773, the Jesuits are given an option by the kings of Europe saying you can either have your temporal prosperity and we'll give you territory, or we're going to keep all that territory. You can either have that territory and abolish the Jesuit order, or we will keep the territory. So they have a choice, abolish the Jesuit order or maintain temporal prosperity. And what do? They abolished the Jesuits and compromised. They made a compromise, and they chose their temporal prosperity instead of the job function given to them by their boss. They went into a Laodicean condition. It's the same thing as what we went into in 1850. We stopped fulfilling our job function because we were worried about our comfort, and they stopped fulfilling their job function because they were worried about their comfort. This is why the papacy is in rebellion to who? Who are they in rebellion to in 1773? Satan. So now you have a pope who is in rebellion to Satan. If a pope is in rebellion to Satan, does that make him here? Is he part of God's church because he's in rebellion to Satan? No. So can someone who is wicked be in rebellion to Satan? Because we know that pope was not a good man. And not just him, we could go through the history of Fatima. Those popes are rejecting the counterfeit three angels' messages. They're in rebellion to their boss. Does that make them part of God's kingdom or God's people? No. So now your problem is you've just created a third group. Because you've said that you have Satan's church and God's church, but that you can be in rebellion to either one. Because the Pope, who's rejecting Fatima, he doesn't come over here. God does not become his boss. Can we see that? So when we create this model of state over church, the state or the state power is in rebellion to who? To the church. What church? Any church. So if this model is a church-state relationship and this model is a church-state relationship, the King of the South is also a church-state relationship. But the King of the South controls that church. He's in rebellion to any authority that church has over him. So I would come back to our verse. No man can serve two masters. But what happens if you reject the authority of either master? You decide you're going to serve yourself. We could put Vladimir Putin in this story. Is he in rebellion to the papacy? Yes. Is he in rebellion to God? Yes. Who does he serve? Himself. And he controls any church. So if God wants us to go into Russia and do a work, we're going to have trouble because we cannot count on any even freedom from the government. If Satan wants to go into Russia and do a work or anywhere under Russia's influence, he has the same problem. It's a restraint on any church, whether it's God's church or Satan's church. Do you have any thoughts or questions so far? Luke 11:18. Luke 11, verse 18. We'll start in verse 17. But he, knowing their thoughts, said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. What's a kingdom divided against itself? What would we call that? If a kingdom is divided against itself, civil war. We would call that a civil war. If a kingdom is divided against itself, if it goes into civil war, it's brought to desolation. A house divided against a house falleth. If Satan also be divided against himself, how shall his kingdom stand? So they've come to him and said, you're casting out demons because you're Satan. And he's saying, if I'm casting out my own, Satan's kingdom is not divided against itself. So I can't be casting out my own demons. If the king of the north and the king of the south are in a war, and they're both part of Satan's kingdom, what is that? It's a civil war. We would have to call this whole war a civil war within Satan's kingdom. And Satan, if he's divided against himself, his kingdom cannot stand. King of the north and the king of the south would crumble. Satan knows that, so when it comes to 1917 and you have the Soviet Union beginning to rise up, is he rising up a satanic entity that is going to be at civil war with his own church? No, he's not going to create a civil war within his own kingdom. He knows these verses and he knows the principle. He's not going to send his own church into a civil war. Does that make sense? So I would suggest no man can serve two masters. But this model of the king of the south serves no master because the master is a church power. God or Satan, papacy or Adventism, it's a church power. And the king of the south does not serve two masters, it serves no master. Does that make sense? Do we have any thoughts or questions? Going back online. Sorry.
But when you read the GCLG, you can tell you that French was a manifestation of satanic power. This was a king of the south. So if you want to resemble or you can compare contrast Russia and France, we have been told you see that it's a manifestation of satanic power. So how is it not satanic here? It serves itself.
If you were to go to Webster's 1828 dictionary, it's going to define satanic. It says satanic means having the qualities of Satan, resembling Satan, extremely malicious or wicked, devilish, infernal. So when we use the word satanic, it doesn't mean that it is of Satan. It means that it has the qualities of Satan. So I would say Hitler is satanic in this kind of term that he is from Satan, but Stalin is also satanic. He has the qualities of Satan because who does Satan serve? Himself. So anyone that serves themselves has the qualities of Satan. That doesn't mean they have to serve him. And when we serve ourselves, we have the qualities of Satan, we soon start acting like he acts, which is why you have Hitler and Stalin, who are polar opposites. They look at the same. And
we can show that the image is the king of the north. If you go to the history of Greece, Greece is the king of the north. But from the king of the north, we find Egypt breaking loose and begin to rebel against the king of the north. So I think you can create this model back in heaven where you see that Satan has no boss. And if you compare and contrast him with Christ, if there is geography identified with Christ, I think you have to identify Satan with geography.
the only thing that I would ask you to clarify in this statement is God the Father, the boss of the Son.
In heaven. So I think you have Christ fighting against Satan, and at that point is identified as Michael, the archangel, who is like God. But you have God the Father. So you have the Son and the Father. And at one level you can identify that the Father is the boss of the Son, but at another level you can identify the Messiah also.
Before the rebellion, before Satan rebelled we're told that God made it public knowledge that his Son was equal with himself. This is why Lucifer is even rebelling in the first place. If Jesus or the Son is under the Father, Satan has no problems with that, because they're all under the Father. It's when Jesus says, or God says, no, he's my equal, that Satan has any cause for complaint. But I still think you made a good point, because I don't think that the Father or the Son were serving themselves. They're serving us, aren't they? They're serving the universe, so who's their boss? They're stuck in that model because they're holy, isn't it? They can't serve themselves. Who are they going to serve? Everyone else. So I still think you can build a model that looks ugly, but it fits. Why did Christ come to die? Why did he wash the feet? To give an example. Because that's how he saw himself. He was the greatest will be the least. You can't get greater, so you can't get anyone who's going to serve more. No one can serve more than God does. Any other thoughts or questions? Is everyone okay with that point? Please raise your hand if you're not. I know that it's 7:20, we're run late today, so I might not go to another question unless anyone wants to add to this one. What I would like to do is I'll just read a couple of quotes before we close. I'm going to read from the Review and Herald, December 16, 1884, paragraph 1. This whole section is worth reading. I haven't read it all because it's quite long, but a friend sent it to me, and I think it's timely. December 16, 1884, paragraph 1. Another year has almost passed into eternity. 1884 is almost dead. 1885 will soon be here. 2019 is almost dead. 2020 will soon be here. Let us review the record of the year that so soon will be past. What advancement have we made in Christian experience? Our work. Have we so done it that it will bear the inspection of the Master, who has given to every man work according to his ability? Will it be consumed as hay, wood, and stubble, unworthy of preservation, or will it stand for trial by fire? The need of fidelity is overlooked by many. There is a great deal to be done in this world, not in our way, but in God's way, for the benefit of those for whom Christ has died. But if this is done negligently or imperfectly, wanting will be written against any names in the book of heavenly records. If there have been difficulties, brethren and sisters, if envy, malice, bitterness, evil surmisings have existed, confess these sins, not in a general way, but go to your brethren and sisters personally, be definite. If you have committed one wrong and they 20, confess that one as though you were the chief offender. Take them by the hand, let your heart soften under the influence of the Spirit of God, and say, will you forgive me? I have not felt right toward you. I want to make right every wrong, that naught may stand registered against me in the books of heaven. I must have a clean record. Who think you would withstand such a movement as this? There is too much coldness and indifference, too much of the I don't care spirit exercised among the professed followers of Christ. All should feel a care for one another, jealously guarding each other's interests. Love one another. Then we should stand a strong wall against Satan's devices. Amid opposition and persecution, we would not join the vindictive ones, nor unite with the followers of the great rebel. whose special work is to accuse the brethren, to defame and cast stain upon their characters. Let the remnant of this year be improved in destroying every fibre of the root of bitterness, burying them in the grave with the old year. Begin the new year with more tender regard, with deeper love for every member of the Lord's family. Press together. United we stand, divided we fall. Take a higher, nobler stand than you ever have before. It's not just Satan's kingdom that divided against itself will fall. God's kingdom cannot be divided against itself. United we stand, divided we fall. That is what Ellen White asked them to take into the new year in December of 1884. And I think it has application for us today as we head into 2020 to search our hearts and do similarly. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for our blessings. Thank you for the year that you have given us. We know it's been a difficult year, painful for a great many, but Lord, you've led us through it, and we trust that you'll lead us through whatever strife and trouble is stirring now and whatever will come in the future. I pray, Lord, that we'll put away every fibre of bitterness, that we will love our brethren and be drawn closer and closer into unity, that we can stand as that strong wall against Satan's devices. We know, Lord, that he is working in the world. We see that in such a clear way now. We can look at the news and see the work of Satan. I pray, Lord, that we might be fitted to stand against that. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.